All right, good evening, everyone. We're starting just a couple of minutes late, but I'll just make sure we make up that time and fill it in at the end. And haha. Anyway, so this is lesson number 12, Islam, and this is lessons from church history again. And so I'm kind of excited about this lesson, and so we'll get right to it. So didn't get a movement on it. Okay, Jess, got a little technical difficulty. Did I hit picture in picture? All right, now let's see if it works. All right, so first is a declaration, which I didn't update this from last week, so you'll have to excuse me from the Latin. And you can get a hold of me here at my email address, and I will say that I'm going to give everybody an F if I get no more comments, because I got 0 comments this last week. So just so you'll know, send me a text, send me that. And if you got statements or questions while we're live, Jesse's standing by and ready to hear things or record things. If you're recorded and you want to send an email or talk to me later, please feel free to do that. And there are some things that we will put on the Church Center app as we go along through. So again, send in your requests for topics, because otherwise you won't get what you're looking for. And you may not know what you're looking for, but at least you'll get something. All right, so heard on the street this week. Nate G said the legal aspect of atonement is what I've always been taught, and I'm not a legalist, and I'm not either, but that is one of the things that's a huge difference between Orthodox and Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity, is that view. Adam C also said something to the effect of, I'm inclined to their Orthodox view of atonement. And so if you go back to it, you got to think about what those mean. And it did generate some discussion a little bit after our session here last week. And then James B said, I didn't realize there was a whole other Christian church out there. And that is true. And I wasn't either until I really started doing the study. And so this is part of this, is we learn something as we go along. So that will be said. All right, so what's on the docket for tonight? We're going to give the official version of Islam, and that by official I mean what Islam would tell you. We're going to do a little bit of an alternative view about what historians would tell you, and then we're going to talk about the worst time to be alive, period, all time. And then we're going to talk about, I'm going to finish it up talking about core Islam and kind of how Christianity and core Islam are different. So with that being said, move to the next one. Why include Islam in a class on church history? Well, Islam has nearly 2 billion adherents today, which is about 24% of the world population. So they are a force without a doubt. Islam has replaced Christianity in Northern Africa, the Middle East, and a good part of Asia as well too. And most converts to Islam were from Christianity. Not happening today as much, but historically most of them were converts from Christianity. And we'll talk a little bit about why that happened. Islam claims to be the one true religion. All right, so they don't tolerate differences on that. They believe that they have the divine and final revelation of God, and they emphasize one God and Muhammad as his prophet. You've probably heard that phrase mentioned quite often. The Quran, they will say, is the literal word of God, and it was spoken in Arabic. So if you look at the copy of the Quran, I was able to get an English copy of the Quran and read the preface on that, and they said, we've translated this and we've tried to make it work right, but really you can only get the true inspired word of God if you're reading in Arabic, which is the most perfect language there is. That's the official version, remember? And then they reject completely and is idolatry. That is anathema to them, and they really enforce that through their religion as well too. So Arabic Abe is going to give us a few words of the day. All right, so new character today. Islam is from Arabic Islam, which means submission. And by the way, so does Muslim. Muslim is the Arabic aslama, meaning he submitted. And so if you talk about Islam, you're talking about the religion. If you're talking about a Muslim, you're talking about a person. And so that would be kind of the difference, but they both have the aspect of submission and that you have submitted to God. Quran is from the Arabic Quran, meaning book, and it's a reading recitation. So that's what they will say, is that is what they believe is their holy book. And then another term that you may or may not have heard of, hadith. And hadith is from haditha, meaning tradition, and that's the verbally transmitted record of the teachings, actions, deeds, sayings, silent approvals, and disapprovals attributed to Muhammad. So even the way he might look, so his nonverbals come in on the hadith as well. So here's the official version of Islam. Muhammad was born in Mecca around 570, 571, and they may have a specific date, but those are pretty close to the date. So near the end of the 6th century. And so he belonged to a powerful Quraysh tribe. And at that point in time, there were multiple tribes that were all throughout Arabia, and different ones of them held different kind of power. Now, he in particular, part of this tribe, was in Mecca, is they controlled the tourist trade. So they would have people that were coming through all the time, and that was part of what he was doing. And so that was quite lucrative, and that made him powerful, and they had lots and lots of kids and everything else that you can imagine. Now, his father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was 6 years old and orphaned him. And so he was raised by an uncle, and he was a poor uncle, and he was Abu Talib. And so if you ever hear the name Talib, there was a famous football player for the Broncos, Aqib Talib. It's named after this guy. And he was a shepherd. So he's come up in pretty humble circumstances. But he worked for this very wealthy widow that was 15 years his senior, all right? And her name was Khadijah, and that's who he married. And after working for her for a while, I think she was 40 when he was married, and he was like 25. And then he fathered 2 boys and 4 girls by her. The youngest one's name is Fatima. And so you'll see that name a lot in Islam or Arabic circles as well too. His travels, he came within contact of Jews and Christians, and he did travel on behalf of the tribe in multiple places, but he would come in contact with Jews and he'd come in contact with Christians, so he was not unfamiliar with either of those. And he was they would call him a sincere worshiper of the one true God, but he never converted to Judaism or Christianity. All right. Move on, in 610, so he's in his 20s now, he received the first of many personal revelations from the angel Gabriel. And as the story goes, he's up in a cave and he's doing this thing with the sheep or whatever, and he has Gabriel come and show him and says, you need to record this down. And so that's what he did, is he starts recording it, and that was what became as the Quran. And he related his experiences to his wife, and she believed that God would not allow such a good man as Muhammad to be deceived. And so that's her thing, and said he's so good, God would not deceive him. So these have to be true. And so that's what the version is. She was his first convert. Slowly, he became the center of a new religious movement. And so he's preaching this morality, and the Quran is a mix of lots of different things. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about it, but it's a mix of how you govern the country, how you govern people, how you govern your life. And so he's kind of teaching these things, and so he's really criticizing paganism, which, polytheism and paganism would have been very, very strong in Arabia at the time. And so he's going through that, and that's one of the things that he's preaching against. He's saying, no, there should just be one God. And you got to think, who did he hear that from? Probably the Jews, the Christians, that he's heard that term. All right, well, he converted his friend Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph, however you say that. And Omar was the second caliph, and then son-in-law Uthman was the third caliph. And you're going to see those if you do anything with Arabic or the Islam, you're going to see them. There's 4 major caliphs. And if you go into a mosque, you'll see a lot of times there will be set on the corners of the buildings the 4 different caliphs, and Muhammad's kind of got front and center on some of the things. In 622, his tribe is getting mad at him, and so they basically kick him and his bunch out because he's starting to interfere with their economic gains. And so he kicks them out, and he goes up to a place called Medina. And this is his Hijra, and that's when the official Muslim year begins, is in 622. So that was year 0 or 1 for them. And he eventually became the political and religious leader, and so he basically takes over Medina. Eventually, he takes 10,000 soldiers and goes back to Mecca. And now he's the top dog in Mecca. That was after about 8 years, so 630 AD, just to get your place in there. So to continue on, he won over the hearts and minds at the tip of the sword of Mecca. So this was a very, that's basically what you got to think of, is this is a military takeover of Mecca. He cleansed Mecca, and they have the thing that's called the Kaaba, and we'll talk a little bit more about what the Kaaba is. And he cleaned it, and it had pagan idols in it. He got them all out, cleaned it out, and so then it becomes the holy site for Islam. He delivered the Quran, and in their words, it remains today completely intact and unaltered in its original Arabic form. So what you get, if you get the Arabic version of that, is exactly what it was whenever he was given to it by the angel Gabriel. His sayings, actions, and judgments were collected in the hadith from oral tradition after his death, and they will say, yeah, there was lots of hadith that was running around. So that's these sayings. Most people haven't heard of those things, but that's where they get a lot of the way that they would govern things. After his death, his buddy Abu Bakr, the first caliph, was his successor, and that's basically what caliph means, is successor, by the way. Then the Quran is the constitution, and don't lose sight of that. It is the constitution revealed by God to regulate and govern human life. So that includes government. And so you cannot separate Islam, the religion, from government. That is the goal for Islam. They say if you want to have a perfect government, you have to govern it per the rules and regulations of Islam. So, as you can imagine, there are other people that have different views. And so as I was researching this, run across several of them, and I'm going to print just some copies of this thing and what we really know. So first of all, there were no Arabic historians, all right, up until the 9th century. So you're not going to have a recording one that was a person, a peer, that would have been on the scene. So like Peter he lived with Jesus, basically, or the Apostle John lived with Jesus. They were eyewitnesses. You have no eyewitness accounts that they wrote anything down until the 9th century, which you think that's going to be nearly 200 years later. Probably more like 150, but that's going to be something you have there. So just think about right now, 150 years ago, what was going on in the United States? See, first you got to do the math. Civil War. All right. And if we were trying to put together a record of the Civil War, you've been taught things, and if you didn't have a textbook or anything to go by, you would sit there and go like, well, I know that the North fought the South, and there was a battle at Gettysburg and Shiloh and Vicksburg, and you can kind of go on, and it was about slavery, and you can kind of go through that stuff. But if we all had to do that, we would have, and here there's several people in here, we would have 8 different versions of what happened in the Civil War. And so that's kind of what goes on. So there is no thing until 150 to 200 years later. The early 8th century writings, so if you go to this and find actually historical writings, mentions an Arabic military leader named Muhammad. That's 8th century, so that's in the 700s. So this is probably 100 years after him, as they finally do mention, yeah, was this military leader named Muhammad. All right, and there's reasons that they're going to start mentioning him. And that he led a military movement, and he conquered much of Arabia, which today is Saudi Arabia, and then you have the UAE and some other countries that are on the coasts. In the late 8th century, the Islamic scholar Abu Bakr, Ibn Abi Dawud al-Sijistani So he's named after the other guy. All right. So long name. He basically took it upon himself to clean it all up. And he had, he says he says Muhammad may have dictated the Quran to a scribe, and this is what he said. He said he may have dictated it to a scribe who took liberties, all right, in his writing. And so what he just admitted right there, now this is a scholar from the 8th century, and so this scholar from the 8th century says, yeah, that maybe it's really not the word of God as the official version says. So that's one of the clues that you start looking at this. And the scribe maybe had taken liberties in how he did it. So as this cat's doing things, he's looking at the thing and going like, hey, there's so many different versions out here. We need to clean it up and make sure we got the right one. There were multiple versions as late as the 9th century. And then this guy, Hajjaj, he was a ruthless Muslim governor in 714, and he altered a lot of the text to suit his preferences. And so that's one of the things that came into play on this is like, you know, he's fixing this to make it work for what he wants to do. And so that's why you would see multiple versions of that. So that being the one true version that has existed for now 1,400 years is a little bit in doubt. Erling Peterson said this: the authentic historical narratives are ideological forgeries crafted to advance socio-political and sectarian agendas. Now, these are historical scholars, and they're basically saying it's not what they say it is. Now, people are afraid of Islam, and there's a reason. It's because they get very fanatical about things. And so even as I say things tonight, if this gets out and somebody comes over, you know, it is a risk that people have to say when they criticize Islam. So that being said, I'm okay. All right. Truth is what we're really after. Robert Hoyland, another historian, he said this: many non-Muslims portray Muhammad as a deceiving preacher, a false prophet, an Arabian warlord leading nomadic invasions into Christian, Jewish, and Zoroastrian territories. And so this guy comes back in and goes like, not really what you think he is, right? And in the late 9th century, Bukhari, I'll just lose his last name, al-Bukhari, he collected some 6,000 hadiths, 600,000 hadiths, that's the sayings. So he collects all those, just like this guy in the background with the big books. He edited them down to 7,225. And so as he does this, 6 of those books that he does in there, so 6 of those, this becomes, that 7,200 verses basically becomes the 6 books of the Sunni Islam, which is about 85% of Islam. And so they say these 6 books are the hadith, this is what we follow. And then Shia Islam, and that's the 2 big sects of Islam, they're about 15%, and that's where you're going to find modern day Iran is going to be Shia, and they have a whole different, more conservative view. They recognize only 4 books as the hadith, and so there is some discrepancy of what they have on that, and it's not quite as unified as what you'd like to see. I relied on this book called The Shadow and the Sword, and I would highly recommend it. Very entertaining reading. This is a historian. He will challenge, and he'll challenge some of your Christian preconceptions too. But he basically comes in, Tom Holland, and he says this is a revisionist history. And he goes through and just kind of knocks it down and proves it over and over and over again. And so this is what he said, and I'm going to have to turn and read this on the screen. Of the written evidence composed before AD 800, the only traces we possess are either the barest shreds of shreds, or else the delusory shimmering of mirages. No empire can be raised amid a silence, of course, but what we chiefly hear now from the founding of the caliphate is the mere sound and fury, tales told centuries later and signifying, if not nothing, then very little. The voices of Arab warriors who dismembered the ancient empires of Persia and Rome have all been silenced utterly and forever. Neither letters, nor speeches, nor journals, if they were ever so much as written, have survived. There is no hint as to what those who actually lived through the establishment of the caliphate thought, or felt, or believed. It is as though we had no eyewitness accounts to the Protestant Reformation, the French Revolution, or the 2 world wars. So pretty scathing comment about what the veracity of Quran and the Hadiths and everything else like that. It says basically you have scraps of scraps, and it kind of made it away. But like all things, if you say it long enough and loud enough and people believe it, it becomes what their version of truth is, right? So this is what the empires looked like in the 6th century. So in the 500s, you see the Eastern Roman Empire, which will come over, and it's basically the Mediterranean basin of what we've seen before, and you kind of run through that. Paying attention down here on the east side, there is the Persian Empire that's kind of yellow, and that's actually called the Sassanid dynasty, and that's what you'll hear more about. It's Persia, and a lot of the terms are used interchangeably, but that was the great empire to the east. And if you look at Saudi Arabia, you see all sorts of things. There was the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids that were kind of border to the Byzantine or the Roman Empire and the Sassanid Empire. Those two countries or empires that, if you will, kingdoms, were used kind of as a buffer between the rest of Saudi Arabia. The rest of Saudi Arabia was fractured. There was all sorts of things in there, and they would come up, and basically those groups would repel them, and they would just have these skirmishes between tribes, for lack of a better term. And so the Romans never took them seriously. The Persians never took them seriously, and they let this other group kind of run their own show down there and keep them at bay. And so that's kind of what it looked like. And you also see northern Africa. Basically, that was the Byzantine Empire. But remember, even by this time, you're starting to see things fall apart in the West. And so when you look up into what we know as Europe today, you'll see Aquitaine, Burgundy, the Lombards, things that really were not under the control of the Romans. So they've already lost a good chunk of Western Europe. And further out here is going to be the Franks. And so you kind of know where that's going to be. So, all right. The Roman Empire at that time was powerful and rich. Justinian I reigned from 527 to 568, the second longest Roman emperor behind Augustus. All right, so you got to put that in mind. If you have an emperor that lives that long, then he was really something. All right, and he's going to be able to control lots of things. And he was the adopted son of the previous emperor, Justin. And Justin was, when he became emperor, was kind of an older gentleman, and he basically let Justinian get things kicked off right then. And so, because of another emperor previous to them, they had a full war chest, and Justinian knew how to spend money, and he put the party on, and we could spend all night talking about him. He is fit for Hollywood movies and everything else. I mean, the guy is fascinating, and what goes on during this time period is amazing. I picked up another book by Tom Holland that was called the Jesus Wars. And it was how I think it's 2 emperors and 2 queens, and anyway, basically shaped what people believe for in the next 1,500 years. And he's one of the guys. All right, Justinian is one of the guys. He had at his disposal a general named Belisarius, and I think there was a series or something on like Netflix or something about Belisarius. I tried to go find it because I thought, well, that'd be kind of interesting to see what the take on it was, and I couldn't find it. So if you know what that is, point me in that direction. I think it'd be kind of interesting to see what Hollywood's take on that was. This guy was a genius general. In fact, he's the one that kind of came back in and reconquered Rome for the Byzantine or the Roman Empire. And so there was lots of things on that. He actually went back in and took over North Africa, and so he actually helped expand the Roman Empire. But he got sideways with Justinian and was eventually put out. But that was one of the things that happened with him. Fascinating story. One of the things about being rich is the taxation was heavy to support his own ambitions. Justinian was the one, and by the way, he had building campaigns deluxe. And whether it was in Rome or Istanbul today, which you still see the Hagia Sophia, this is Justinian's. And amazing, amazing accomplishment just to read about the if you saw it written, it'd be the Hagia Sophia, but it's Hagia Sophia. And so just fascinating about him. And I've used, and you'll see a lot of times, if you ever look at any kind of mosaic, a lot of times it's Justinian. And so that's where it is. And they were also rather thought well of themselves. I said arrogant. They believed that they were ordained by God, and everybody told them that. You're the emperor because you're ordained by God. You're chosen by God. You still see that with kings, and you're going to see that throughout European history, is that they believe that they are chosen by God to be who they are. Very interesting. So the other great empires, the Sassanid, or the Persian Empire, and they have another guy over there. He's very powerful. His name's Khusro, and he reigned for 48 years, which is a long reign as well. And he was something else too. And as I got into this and you start talking about Khusro, he was fascinating. He was the most distinguished. He was probably the most distinguished of all Persian kings, even over Cyrus and some of the others that you would go back to. This guy, he really did a great thing. And he was rich. One of the things that Justinian did to keep things, he actually did a treaty between him and Khusro. And he paid 11,000 pounds of gold for the perpetual peace. And that really lasted for about 50 years, which allowed Belisarius to go conquer Europe, and they didn't have to worry about that border. And so they were looking at things like that. And he was arrogant. He called himself, and everyone called him the King of Kings. That would be the Shah, something Shah, the Shah of Shahs. And so, so that's kind of it. So you have these two powerful, I mean, this is the two big dogs in the world at that time. So, and he basically ruled all the way over to the Indus Valley and all the way up to the Mongol territory and such. So that's what you've got going on there. That's the empires. The Christianity in the 6th century, and what we've hit a lot of, as you're going to look at this thing, you got a nice picture back here of a religious leader or a king with a religious leader, and so all sorts of things going on there. And it was, I would call it imperial Christianity. And it had very powerful bishops, particularly in Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and of course Rome. Now Rome's not going to get in this picture, but these other four, they're going to be in the picture, and pretty soon they're going to be out of the picture by the time we get through with this. They were rich, and they had monasteries that were extremely wealthy. We were able to go to a monastery in Melk, Germany or Austria? Yeah, the Melk Abbey. And when you go into this thing, it just drips money, is the way I would just say it. I mean, that's the only way you can describe it. One of the most fantastic places I've ever seen. And that would have been poor compared to some of the stuff they had in the East. All right, just to get the idea, you can't imagine how much money they had. And so these guys were there. They had a very entrenched orthodoxy. Remember the imperial church? And I meant to wear my shirt tonight. It said orthodoxy or death, because it was enforced by the empire, which meant if you were not orthodox, you were exiled or executed. It was one of those two typically. And so that was kind of it. And they had very extreme prejudices against non-imperial Christians. So that's what I mean. They would actually put them out of their misery. I mean, it was heavy-handed, and they would do things basically to enforce orthodoxy. And that's why you ended up with what we talked about last week, is this Oriental Church of the East that were Nestorian and so forth. So that's kind of the situation leading into this. Non-imperial Christianity, what we talked about last week, it had a large geographic area. It was non-orthodox. They had successful missionaries. They were engaged and influenced by Buddhism, and they were not politically connected as much as the West was. The West, this imperial church was tied in with the empire, and there's no way you just couldn't separate the two. All right, and then everything changed. All right, so now we're going to move into what I think was fascinating for me to go through on this study, and I shared some of this with my son-in-law yesterday, and unfortunately we had to get out of the car, and so I wasn't able to do it all. So you guys get to hear the whole story tonight. Anybody recognize what this might be? Yeah, the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Who are the four horsemen of the apocalypse? Come on. War, disease, death, famine. All right. You want to talk about the worst year of the line? The four horsemen showed up. All right. The worst, not year, this is a time period. The worst time to be alive. Now this right here picture, I had to go looking for this, and I actually just found this yesterday in a National Geographic article. And this is Lake, I got to see if I get it, Iopango in El Salvador. Now, if I asked you to point out where El Salvador is, how many people could identify what continent it is? Okay, Jonah. Central America, that's right. So it's part of that Central American that goes south of Mexico and like that. If you look at this, it looks kind of like Crater Lake, and that's because that's what it is. It is a crater lake. All right, so this Iopango eruption in El Salvador, 10.5 cubic miles of dense rock was ejected into the atmosphere. This was 100 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. For those of you who don't know what Mount St. Helens is, go look it up and you're going to see some pretty impressive pictures. All right, and then think of 100 times more than that. At least 3 volcanic eruptions, and there may have been from this, and there could have been others too. That's really a little bit unsure about what happens because there was nobody recording things going on there. It lowered the global temperature by 4.5 degrees, all right, and that was significant. So what happens? 2 different harvests were missed. The global estimates of deaths because of this was up to 100 million people. 100 million people in the whole globe. That's significant. And they think that perhaps 50% of Europe died. And that you go like, wow. It explains the decline of the Anasazi and Mayan civilizations in the Americas. So they were very powerful, and then you start seeing them decline, and they can kind of trace it back to this time period. It didn't wipe them out then, because they still hung around for another, 500 years after that, but that was kind of it. But strangely enough, it benefited hot climates like the Arabian Peninsula. So what's going to happen in the Arabian Peninsula? You're going to see something going on. So this is the first thing that happens on here. During that year, this is Procopius, who's a historian. He says, a most dread portent took place, for the sun gave forth its light without brightness, and it seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. And the Mandaean Book of Kings, which I believe was Persian, said unprecedented widespread famine. Were you to request 1/10 of a peck of grain, which is basically a cup of grain, for 5 staters, which is about $1,150 in today's money, you would look, but it would not be found. So you can have $1,150 and you cannot buy a cup of grain. And that's going to cause some problems. Cassiodorus wrote several letters, and in these letters, these are just comments, just at random that he made. The sun's rays were weak and appeared bluish in color. People's shadows were not visible. The heat from the sun was feeble. The full moon was empty of splendor. A winter without storms, a spring without mildness, and a summer without heat. Prolonged frost and unseasonable drought. The sky is like cloudy weather, except prolonged. It prevents the true colors of the sun and the moon from being seen, along with the sun warmth. He reported frost during harvest, which made apples harden and grapes sour, and declared the need to use stored food to last through the situation, which they didn't know how long it was. Subsequent letters discuss plans to relieve widespread famine. And so that's some of the picture about what's going on with this. Now, if you're in that day and time, what do you think has just happened? The apocalypse. You've had the apocalypse. You have this thing happen and famine show up. 2 harvests missed and such. So the second thing about the worst time to be alive, you like this guy? This is the Justinian plague, and this happened, and it's kind of suspicious about this. What caused the Justinian plague? All right, and you got to go, I wonder if it had any relationship to the global winter. because it shows up right after that. And I don't know, but you have to speculate. But this is the second thing. So you had famine. Next thing is the Justinian plague, and this is, what's this guy called? Dr. Death or something? Anyway, you'll see him a lot of times associated with the plague, this masked character. All right. So let's talk about Justinian plague. Why is it called the Justinian plague? Well, it's basically because two reasons. One, it was, I'll just give them away right now. Justinian caught the plague and lived, but it happened during his reign. And so that's why it gets named the Justinian plague. As far as they know, this is the first time the plague shows up in the world. And so in 541, there was an outbreak in Pelusium, Egypt, which is a port city near Alexandria. And so basically this ship docks, and the next thing, thousands of people are dying, and just quickly. It's named for Justinian because he contracted it and yet survived. By 542, so a year later, it reached Constantinople, where 1/5 of the population died. So you look around this room, there's tenants in the room, and basically you're going to erase a couple of us. All right, it usually killed victims within 48 hours. And there were reports of ships that would be adrift, and everybody on the ship was dead from the plague. Because when it hit, it was over, and that was just kind of it. At its peak, it was claiming about 10,000 people per day. In Constantinople, the people, and they were trying to keep track of it at start, and then it just overwhelmed. But they started just putting bodies in the streets, all right? And so I know that your mind probably goes to Monty Python and Bring Out Your Dead, all right? And that's, in essence, kind of what's going on, but they're putting bodies in the streets. The streets got so full, they said, we got to move the bodies. So they went and dumped them in the Golden Horn, which then, the Golden Horn is a body of water on the north side of Constantinople. And on the east side is the Bosphorus Straits, all right? They dumped the bodies in there, and it so polluted it that the Bosphorus got polluted as well, too. It just ran out in there. It's just like, because that water and dead bodies and everything don't work real well. It's estimated that because of this plague, 100 million people died. And that's another 100 million that are gone. And it affected basically all over the civilized world, I'll just put it that way. I mentioned that. It caused massive, as you can imagine. You think about COVID for us, COVID-19, and the economic disruption it caused. Think about this. Massive is, I don't know how much you can do that. And this was on top of a global winter that they were kind of just recovering from. So you have this going on. All right, worst time to be alive. So global winter, Justinian plague, and then war. So the third horseman of the apocalypse, and this is the last great war of antiquity, and it was the Romans versus Sassanids. Now these two empires had been at it for 500 years. So just kind of keep that in mind. This war was the worst. All right, hands down. And so we'll talk a little bit about how it happened. And it lasted about 25 years, 26 years. So this is, you can't make this stuff up. So here's this general, Bahram Shoban, and he wins the battle at Merv. And he's a Sassanid general. And they have an emperor there, and this emperor mockingly wanted to congratulate him. And so the king of kings, Hormizd, that was his name, he mocks him by sending him women's underwear. What? Women's underwear, really? All right, I got this lady looking at us. Anyway, so Shoban didn't take that too well. He didn't think it was that funny. So he rebels and has Hormizd's uncle released from prison, who then goes and assassinates him. And guess who's going to be the next king? You'd think Shoban was. Well, nope, Khusro II. All right, but Khusro really doesn't have a big army following him. He just has the rights to be the next emperor. So he heads up to Constantinople. They're sworn enemy in some ways. And he's proclaimed the Shah, or the king, by the Emperor Maurice. Now, I love that name, Emperor Maurice. And he marries Khusro marries a couple of Christian women while he's up there too. All right, so good chance that he's headed toward being a Christian because he's got 2 women, both Christians, that are going to straighten him out. He's actually given the country of Armenia to rule by Maurice. All right, but then there enters another character who thinks Maurice has lost his mind because he teamed up with these Sassanid people down there. And so Choban, oh, by the way, Choban, he proclaims himself the promised savior of the Zoroastrian faith. And so that was, they had a myth in their thing that there was going to be a Messiah showing up as well. And so he says, I'm that guy. All right, so that's kind of how that sets up. Well, with the help of Maurice, Khusro defeats Choban at Ctesiphon, and that's a name that I learned to pronounce this week. I couldn't pronounce that last week. That was near Baghdad. That was their ancient empire headquarters near modern-day Baghdad. All right, so keep going. Back in Constantinople, we play the Game of Thrones up that way, and Maurice is assassinated by a guy named Phocas, and Phocas becomes the emperor. Now, Phocas doesn't like the fact that they made a deal with the Sassanids. So, since he assassinated his buddy Maurice, Khusro decides to declare war on him, and that's how the war got started. 26 years, the deadliest conflict in the 500 plus years of war between the 2 great empires. Each side would lose 250,000 soldiers, each side. And basically, it was ebbs and flows throughout this time. I mean, they got all the way to Constantinople, laid it under siege, couldn't take it because of the walls. They got beat back, and it's just kind of back and forth like that. And so that's kind of the war there, the last great war of antiquity. But it depleted the military and economic resources of both empires. All right, so we had 3 things go on. What's the 4th? Worst time to be alive. Global winter, Justinian plague, the last great war. Oh, the Muslims. Can I call it death? So the Muslims, and look at the series of this, how quick this happens. Why? Because you don't got nobody resisting you. All right, now you still have the bones, the wealth, some things that are there. You still have the rich, fertile lands, everything like that, but there's nobody to defend it, and people are sick of fighting, sick of sending their kids to war, everything else. And so Muslims come in, and rapidly they conquer the Sassanids, so they get the Persian Empire, still have it today. They conquer the Levant. By the way, that's the end of the Persian Empire. Over, done with. The Levant, which is going to be Syria, Jerusalem, that area like that. They jump the Gulf over there and go into Egypt. This is when they burned the Library of Alexandria. And then they conquered the Maghreb, which is North Africa. And then they're going to conquer Hispania, which is going to be Spain, Portugal, all the way up to the Pyrenees, where the French are going to put a stop to it. And that's a lesson for another day. Think this is the worst time to be alive? Look at this time. This is like, and if you were in that thing, and what are you thinking if you're a Christian follower and you're going like, God is punishing us? What are these guys saying over here? And so you're going like, if you want to be on the winning side, you might want to switch sides. The Book of Kings, this epic poem of Phaedrus. And by the way, this, one of those things that you learn and you find out, I've never heard of this thing, and that's Shahnameh, which is basically means the Shah. You get that book, The Kings. Anyway, he said this: damn this world, damn this time, damn this fate, that uncivilized Arabs have come to make me a Muslim. Where are your valiant warriors and priests? Where are your hunting parties and your feasts? Where is that warlike mien, and where are those great armies that destroyed our country's foes? Count Iran as a ruin, as the lair of lions and leopards. Look now and despair. And that pretty well summed up what people thought of the Muslims coming in. Yeah. So remember this map I showed you early on? 7th century. This is the 8th century. And now, if you look at this, you'll see down here in the purple, this is their conquering. So they go from that dark purple, take over Persia, go all the way up to the Caucasus Mountains. They got Egypt all the way over to Tripoli. By 671, I think, or 631, they've conquered all the way over to the Pyrenees. And so that's kind of where it is. What they don't have is Anatolia, or what we would call Turkey today, because the Byzantines basically still kept them at bay there. And some of it's because they spent so much effort on that. Even that's going to change, though, because what's Turkey today? Muslim. Yep. Greece, not. So basically where Constantinople is, Muslim to the east and south. And then this, by the way, gets reconquered. That's going to be another lesson later on. But that's kind of where you went on down through that. So lots and lots of things changed in a very, very short period of time. And hopefully you can see why it changed. All right. So why did people do it? Number one, it's the new authority. All right. So that's one fact, is it's less oppressive than the old authority. Remember I talked about how arrogant and heavy-handed and both of these empires were? These new guys come in, and by the way, they employed Christians as their managers. They worked side by side along with them. And in fact, they wanted them to be Christians because they could tax them more. Because Muslims, they couldn't tax as much. And that's what you see the next thing. So the Muslims pay a 4.5% tax of their wealth, basically. Non-Muslims, 10%, because that's how they taxed people. The simple religion, and it was easy to understand, and we're going to kind of walk through that here pretty quickly. And they were also compelled by the sword, and still are today. All right, and so that's kind of thing. Now I say that with the thing: Christians compelled people by the sword too. The imperial church, without a doubt, would compel people by the sword, and they did that beyond that. And in fact, when you get into the Crusades, there was as much blood on their hands as the Muslims ever had. So their core beliefs, and so we're just kind of take a look at this. The Quran, and we've talked about that, is the constitution revealed by God to regulate and govern human life. The Quran is not a biography. It doesn't tell you, I think Muhammad is mentioned 4 times in the whole thing. Jesus is mentioned a couple, Mary's mentioned a couple, but that's kind of it. It's really more about how you govern and regulate life. And you think of it more kind of like what the Proverbs would be, but if you were saying that's how we're going to govern, is basically by the Proverbs, you might get it close. The 5 pillars of Islam, if you haven't heard these, there's a proclamation of faith, which says there's none worthy of respect except Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. And you'll hear that. They'll say that, and they chant that and everything else. Worship, everybody knows about that. They pray 5 times. They have their worship rugs, and they'll take those out. A devout Muslim will take that out, turn it towards Mecca, and pray 5 times. Why Mecca? Say what? That's where he was born, but it's more than that. It's because that's where the Kaaba is. Now, they believe the Kaaba was where Abraham went to offer Ishmael and was held back by God. You got that difference on there? That's their version of that story. And just to keep that on there. And that's where the Kaaba is, and it's a meteorite that's inside that big cube. Almsgiving, 2.5% of savings. I think it's 4.5. I think I typed that wrong. Fasting, and by the way, which is compared to what these other countries were charging, because they would you just give us all your profits. Let's just do that. Fasting during the month of Ramadan, they fast from dawn in the morning. So they basically fast during the daylight hours. And then their last pillar is Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca, and you do it 1 time during your lifetime. And then the other, very simple, is that they believe everybody's equal under Islam. They do not show favoritism, and even though they don't practice that, that is one of the things that they're beliefs. And so, you hear this message coming in versus some of the stuff that was going on before with, the Persians with Zoroastrianism, or even imperial Christianity. Sounds simple, easy. Click these 5 things off. I'm good to go. All right. The pilgrimage to Mecca. All right. This is going to be interesting. If you haven't familiarized with this, you see the Kaaba back here. It's a big, and we'll show another picture of that. It's that you have to wear the correct clothes, which are typically white. Women are fully covered head, mask, everything. You pray and circle the Kaaba 7 times. Then you walk between these 2 hills, Safra and Marwa. And this actually is a covered area, which I thought was really interesting, and the hills are nothing. You'll see a picture of them. You camp out at Mina, which is here on the map. Then you go to Arafat, and then you ask for forgiveness at Arafat. And then on the way back, you stop at Muzdalifa, and there you sleep under the stars or the parking lot lights, whatever it may be. Then you stop at 3 walls that are back in here called Jamarat, and you hurl stones at the walls, signifying a stoning of the devil. And then you sacrifice an animal, and that's Eid, and you'll see that if you ever see a calendar, and they'll say something about Eid, whatever. This is the sacrifice of animals during the Hajj. And then basically you go back and circle Kaaba 7 more times. Let's look at some of the pictures of this. So we're going to walk through this. There they are circling Hajj. They're circling the Kaaba. And just get the amount of people that are there. And they are walking around down in here too. This is a thing. And then they have the loudspeakers going on. All these minarets that are there, that's where they're loudspeakers, and they're calling them to prayer. And then they will all stop at one time and all go down and point right towards that cube and do their prayers. It's just an unbelievable, quiet sight. This is between the 2 stones, all right? And you can see this side, and then over on the other side, you can kind of see between the pillars, there's another thing just as big as this. And so they walk down there, and then they walk back and do that several times. This is at the stone, so you can see what the stone looks like under the chandelier there. People up on top. So they make that pilgrimage back and forth between these. And then this is Mina, where they camp out. And so they already have, pilgrimage is a big thing, and it's a big industry there. And so they have all these tents already set up, and you have to register and do everything else, and you go find your tent and stay in that. And that's a pretty big compound, if you ask me. This is Mount Ararat, all right? And here they're going up, and this is where they're going to confess their sins to a pillar up there. And then this is camp out under the stars. And I assume those are stars back there. They look like street lamps to me. But these are people sleeping, and they all sleep out in the open. All right. Then this is where they throw rocks at the devil, and these are these pillars, and there's 3 of them that are down through this structure. And you see those, and so they basically go in there and throw rocks, and they have little pebbles, and they just toss those at the devil. And then this is the sacrifice. And if you look close at this picture, you're going to see all sorts of animals in there, mostly goats, sheep, things like that. And I can't imagine how much blood flows at this time, because I'm not sure who has to sacrifice what and how and everything else and what they do with all those dead animals. Didn't get into it that far. And then they go back to the Kaaba, and you can see another picture of that that's in there. I would invite you, if you're interested in this, you can go just type in Hajj, and there are videos that are on this thing, and they'll show you these things in motion. And I was going to do that, but Jesse reminded me that might be difficult with the streaming and everything. So I really would say, go watch one of those. You'll see some stuff. It gets to be fascinating just to see this stuff. All right. How has Islam affected the church? All right. Interesting question. Now, hopefully you learned something about Islam tonight. One is they have duped billions of people, because it is not a true religion by any way, shape, or form. And that's one of the things. It is not a religion of peace either. And in fact, I think Kathy was the one that had told me, a lady in the Bible study, she says there is no peace in Islam. So you do not get that. It's very ritualistic, and it can get very legalistic and everything else that you go through here. So don't get duped by thinking, oh yeah, they're all okay, because they really would love to be in charge of our life as well too. They created the Crusades, all right? So what goes on, and we're going to get to that, but because of Islam, and they had the Holy Land, a pope that we'll learn about later says, we need to get that back, all right? And so they created the Crusades. They go down and basically pretty bloody battles too. I think this is one of the significant things. I think they make us examine our beliefs, because you have to compare that and say, I mean, I look at that picture of the Hajj and all those people doing that, And they're sincere, honest believers in that. They're wrong, but they are. And then I look at it and say, how sincere and honest and devoted are we to the King of Kings? And to me, it's a lesson. And so it's something that we look at and we say, like, we're in a spiritual battle, not a physical battle. They think it's a physical battle, but we're in a spiritual battle. These verses, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. All right, our good old Apostle Paul said that. At the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Everyone just say that with me. Jesus Christ is Lord. Isn't that, you know, as opposed to saying these other things that they say. And then Jesus said this, my kingdom is not of this world. And I also, I don't think I put it, yeah. And Jesus also said, I will build my church, and the gates of hell or Islam or anything else will not prevail against it. Now, he doesn't say the gates, I will build my imperial church. He says, I will build my church. We are not the imperial church. And I'm so glad for that, because I think there's so many things wrong with it as well, too. But that is what it is. And the gates of hell will not prevail against us. And so I'm not afraid. If somebody shows up next week and takes me out, it's all right. I've got a hope in heaven, and it's not on this earth. All right. Would I miss you guys? Nope, because I'll be in heaven. Would you miss me? Yeah, because then somebody else has to do these lessons. But that's kind of what it is. All right. Questions or comments? And do we have anything online, Jess?
Was the Justinian plague the same thing as the Black Plague?
It's kind of a yes and no answer. It was the same pest. It was all the same things for the Black Plague. It just happens about 800 years prior to the Black Plague. In fact, it's probably the precursor to the Black Plague. But the Black Plague gets its own name that we're much more familiar with. But it is the same. You know, they think it was caused by fleas on rats that would bite people and share this. I can't remember, it's Pestinius or something is what it's called, a bacteria.
You said Muhammad converted. You said that acknowledge this, but Muhammad converted at the sword, but so did the.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. The Imperial Church did too. Yes.
An observation from when we were in Senegal that they pointed out was, because we were there as they were preparing for aid, and one of the important differences is they're required to sacrifice the animal, but then they just eat them.
They just eat them.
They just eat them. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not in the Hebrew Bible. They give it to the priests, but for them, it's just another meal.
Yeah. So I would like to repeat the questions they were asking. Is this the same as the Black Plague? And it's kind of a yes/no answer, different name, same thing. And then it was the comment about sacrificing animals, that they sacrifice them and just eat them. You know, it's like, did we sacrifice a pig today? Well, not to a religion. We ate one or part of one.
So today, Islam is still growing.
Yeah.
No, yes, no. Well, I was just wondering, is it still by the sword? Is it tradition passed down through families? Because it's big and it has been around.
Right. So the question is a statement that Islam is still growing today, and was it by the sword, or how's it still growing today? And there's several answers. There are some by the sword, especially when you get into Africa and you hear about some of the things that are going on there, if you pay any attention to it. So there is still some of that. It's really more that they will try to grow through political means. There was a guy, Michael Medved, that would talk about how there's been so many people move into France, into Paris, and now there's like 10% of the population, and they're starting to win positions in the government, and they're trying to impose laws that are favorable towards Islam, and so they'll start doing that. You see some of the things going on in our country too. I mean, Minnesota, what's her name?
Ilhan Omar?
Yeah, Omar. And there's a few others that are in our Congress now, and that's what they'll do. So what they will do is they do that, and at some point in time, there's a tipping point, and then they basically take over, and then because of that, they're allowed to impose Islamic law, and so that's just kind of a thing. This other one is mainly by population growth, and if you listen to and I know there's been several things that are out there about how American, French, European, we're not having babies like they are. All right. When you go to an Islamic family, there might be 20 kids by 3 or 4 wives by one man. And you can just kind of look at that. So their biggest growth is basically through procreation. And that still continues, but you get bigger and bigger and bigger like that. And so I applaud Jesse and Angela for, adding 2 to our, instead they replace themselves plus 2, and so it's that kind of thing that, population growth. France had gotten to be a negative population growth where basically a couple was only having 1.9 kids rather than 2 kids. And so they were not replacing their population, and yet you had people from Algeria and such that were moving into France, and they were having kids like crazy and growing, and they've got a real problem on their hands. So that's just, and it takes centuries. As they took over these areas, basically what would happen is you would have this person and basically this was a military conquest, all right? And so you basically just had a new king move in, and the new king, just like, Khusro, not Khusro, Theodoric, who was a Gothic king, right? He comes over, takes over Italy. Hey, I'm the new king, I get to make all the rules. Italians are still there, but pretty soon they're having to deal with what's going on in according to the Gothic rules. And so the one that's in charge gets to make the rules. He's got the military that goes on, and pretty soon you're going like, I ought to just join them rather than fight against them. And so that's why a lot of people, or you worked for them and your kids are growing up with them, and pretty soon you're going like, well, let's see, I got dad over here that's working for the man, or I got my buddy over here that is the man. I'm going to go be with my buddy. And a lot of conversion happened just like that. Happened over centuries, by the way. So other good questions. Anything else? All right. I am having an operation. So next week, Jesse is going to talk about the last Roman. I said philosopher on this. It's the last Roman. And you're in for a treat, because this is something that up until just a few years ago, I'd never heard of this guy's name. And I've mentioned him several times already. His name is Boethius. And so I'm excited for him to do the lesson, and excited to get my new hip in. And hopefully I'll be back in a couple of weeks and teaching you. I might be sitting down while I'm doing it, but I appreciate your prayers. And anyway, so that's it for tonight. Thanks.